So, one of the questions I actually always get is, does LinkedIn ads make sense for my business? That's a question when starting a track or when people start considering LinkedIn ads. The question is, does it make sense for my business? So, to answer that question, I really try to work with what we call the MPMC model. So the MPMC model stands for M markets, products, model, channel. Because if you look at uh, growing a company, you'll probably see that these are the four factors that you have to take into consideration when thinking about the distribution channels, basically. So in order to really think about if LinkedIn ads make sense, and that's the C, which is called channel, if it makes sense on the bottom to see if LinkedIn ads actually is worth it, we have to look at the three other stuff, which is the market, which is the product, and also the model. We have to take this into consideration before we can actually make that decision. Now, in order to make that decision, we're first going to look at the market. Now, this is why B2B marketing strategies and really having a proper segmentation makes sense for your business. Now, in order to define the M, you need to look at your market. So the market consists of two big pillars, I guess. The one is the segment. So which segment are you going after? Because if you have a marketing strategy for one size fits all, we all know that that does not work. So you have to have your market split into different sectors or segments in order to go after those markets. Now, the first thing you do is you pick a segment, and don't worry if you don't understand the whole thing here. I'll give an explanation on how this is, put into place in the slide after this. So the first one is your segment. You pick your segment. For example, an agency with a size of 10 to 50 employees. That's the market segment we're going after for this product, basically. And within that market segment, we have a few what we call ICPs, ideal customer profiles. So the personas, as most marketers would like to call them. So what's the personas within those segments? So in this case, because the agencies are still pretty small, 10 to 50, you're probably going to talk to the CEO and the founder about your product that you're trying to sell because they're still a rather small agency, basically. And then you kind of list up, okay, in that agency, that persona has these pains and gains. That's the simplistic version of market segmentation, ICP, and all that fun stuff. So this is normally a little broader, but it just gives you a little bit of a perspective on how to think about this. And if you want to go deeper, feel free to go a little deeper inside of this. So you have your market segments, you have your personas, they have some pains and gains, and at the other side of the spectrum, which is up there, you can see the product. So what product are you trying to sell to the CEO of an agency of 10 to 50 employees? And this is where you start thinking about what's your value prop towards them? What is the time to value? Like how long does it take to understand your product? If you're selling, these big machines to cut, potatoes, you have to create the machine, you have to deliver the machine, they have to set it up to use. It could take 6 to 9 months before they actually see the value after they purchased, basically. So what is the time to understand, like, hey, this actually makes sense to my business, basically? Then a part of that, of course, is your retention rate. So if you're selling, I guess, big deal sizes of 50K or 500K or 1 million, the retention rate is going to be a little bit different, basically. So these are things to remember when you're going to divide and see if a channel makes sense. You kind of want to see like what's the time to value and what's the retention rate on the product that you're trying to sell to figure out what is the third pillar, which is the model. So the model is very simple. What is the pricing? So what are you trying to sell them to? What's the payment cycle? Are they paying monthly? Do they pay everything in advance? Do they pay on a yearly basis? Something to consider for you to calculate your payback time. So, and the third thing you want to say is, okay, what's your annual recurring revenue or your ARPU, basically? So you want to see how much money are you making from this client per year, basically. So you have this calculation done, and from there you have your retention rate, which was up there. In this case example, you had 2 years of minimum. Most companies stay for 2 years. So basically your customer lifetime value, a minimum of that would be 10K times 2 years. So basically you're making, at the end of the row, you're making 20K out of that client. And based on that, you're basically going to pick your channels. which is downright because we all know LinkedIn is a little bit more expensive than most platforms. So instead of Facebook or SEA and SEO, so based on what you've learned from these three things, you're going to pick your channel. You're going to say, okay, well, if I have 20K, and most companies, but not all, everybody has a very different calculation model, but just as a benchmark, I guess you can use this. They kind of try to see like, okay, the cost of acquisition can be 1/3 of my annual revenue, basically, that I make from this client. So in this case, you make 10K, and your cost of acquisition can be about 3,333 euros. So that opens up the possibilities. Now, in the example I'm going to give you below, or actually on the next slide, you'll see that based on this reasoning, you're going to start to say, okay, Facebook is pretty cheap. Instead of getting conversions, SEA as well, so that kind of makes sense for me. But LinkedIn is going to be too expensive, so you're gonna start figuring out which channels do I focus on depending on the market segments I'm going after. Now, I'm going to give you a concrete example. So here, going back to the MPMC model, you'll see this is actually a business case that was done at a company that I'm running marketing at. Is that they have the same product, but they're selling it to different market segments. So they can sell a product to the government basically with 50,000 employees. They can send the exact same product. They can sell it to freelancers. And the value proposition, the way you market it is very different than selling to government, which makes sense. But how do you make this? How do you make this calculation and kind of figure out if LinkedIn would make sense for these freelancers? Because eventually you can actually target freelancers on LinkedIn. I mean, that's possible. They have the segmentation of, hey, one employee. You can actually do that, but does it make sense? That's the question we're going to answer. So coming back to the example, starting from above, you pick your market segment. Your market segment in this case is freelancers. So that's where you want to go after. That's your segment you're picking. Now, of course, in your ideal customer profile, there's only one person. So there's only one persona within that segment, which is the founder or actually the person that started the company. So the freelancer itself. So it's only just one person. And in this case, the pain and gains was, or their most common pain is that they spend a lot of money transferring money from the money they charge to to their clients to getting it into their own bank account. That's a very expensive in Belgium. It's very expensive is about 50% taxes to go from the company into your own pocket. So that's a lot of pain basically. So if you go to the above, you can see the product. Now, the value proposition of the product is very simple. You can increase your salary without paying taxes. Not a lot, but about 1,700 euros, you can increase your salary with on a yearly basis without actually paying taxes. That's a huge value proposition that you can put into the market for this segment, basically. Now, the time to value in order to get this product is about 1 to 5 days. You can actually order it online on the e-commerce. You can purchase it and you can start using it actually the same day that you get it. Or actually, sorry, it's about 5 days until you get the card and you can sell it. So it's about 1 to 5 days, depending if you already have a card or not. And the retention rate, this is not an actual number, but just to make these calculations, is that you have a retention rate, let's say, of 4 years, just to make our calculations, a little bit of scientific proof behind it. So the retention rate, let's say, is 4 years, time to value 5 days. So once we have those two things, we move into the model. We kind of have a look, okay, does the model make sense? So looking at the model, the pricing to do this, basically, it costs you 12 euro a month for the freelancer, which is not a lot of money. So if you look at the pricing, it's 12 euro a month. The payment cycles are every single month. So you don't get the money up front. You just get 12 euros a month every single month, basically. And then, of course, what you make per year from that freelancer is about 144 euros, basically. Taking into account that the retention rate is about 4 years, you would do your 144 euros times 4 in order to get the customer lifetime value, a minimum customer lifetime value, because you're thinking, well, if he stays for 4 years and I'm getting 144 euros a year, that makes about 567 euros I'm making over the lifespan of him becoming a customer, basically. So in that sense, if you would do your calculations and your cost of acquisition you can actually spend 48 euros to convert that user, not just to become a lead, but really to become a customer of your company basically. So if you take that into consideration and you have a look in your UK base, for example, you say, hey, actually I'm paying €5 per click here. My conversion rate on my website is, let's say, 10%, which is already, quite high. I need to spend at least €50, not just for him to become a client, but actually to become a lead, and then maybe hope that it's going to be a client. So if you make those calculations, you're going to say, well, even if I can target my audience on LinkedIn, it still doesn't make sense to activate the channel because it's too expensive for me to go through it. That's why you're probably going to go for SEO, Facebook, because it's a lot cheaper. You can do the same targeting or a little bit maybe less targeted, but still a lot cheaper to get him into the company basically as a customer basically. So you're going to exclude LinkedIn and not go for LinkedIn because of a strategic choice. And it's actually also a strategic choice we advise to say, look, for this segment in the market, don't go for this channel because it doesn't make sense. It's too expensive. You also have to pay your overhead and all that stuff. It doesn't make sense to go at LinkedIn. But let's say for this exact same company, we have a second market segment, which kind of changes here. Cool. I was not aware of these strong things that are happening, which is pretty cool. So let's say for the exact same company, we're selling the exact same product, but to a different market segment, which have different personas, different markets. So you can see here on the left, we changed the segment, which is 50 plus company size. So a little bit bigger, robuster companies. And here the ideal customer profile is not really the owner anymore. It's not really the person in charge of the company, but it's really because once they grow over 50, people start having an HR manager or an admin person, helping out. The finance manager might come in. So these are the personas that we're targeting. We're not targeting the owners anymore or the freelancers, really targeting specific profiles within companies, basically. Now, their pains and gains are a little bit different than the freelancer. Their pains is to attract and retain talent. That's for the HR person, for example. That's their goal. They want to attract the best talent and retain the best talent. Now, in order to do that, you have a different value prop, which is attract and reward talent in the most cost-effective way, because you can upgrade their salary without actually being charged too much. And the person working there is actually happy because they have their increased salary, but you are also happy because you don't have to pay too much taxes to give that bonus, basically, which in Belgium is really expensive. Here you can see that the time to value is a lot harder because you need to upload a file of all your employees. All of those cards need to be pressured. They need to be sent to the company. You have to have like an email explaining how it works, what you can do with it. So the time to value is a lot, is further down. And here retention, I was just taking a number which is 8 years. Let's say that was 8 years for calculations, company staying there. So based on those numbers, we're going to check how the model would look like. So the model is a little bit different than the previous slides. So in this case, you have your pricing, which is not 12 euros, but actually 600 euros a month to do this for a company. And the payment cycle is also monthly. And you can see now that the revenue you're creating for that company on a yearly basis is 7,200 euros, taking care of a retention rate of 8 euros. You're going to see that the customer lifetime value is 8 times 7,000 euros or 70,000 euros, which is over a 55,000 euro profit or actually revenue that you're getting over those 8 years, basically. So that changes perspective because that kind of opens up more expensive channels. That opens up kind of more longer customer journeys, because of course you're not going to spend 7,200 euros just like this. You want to talk to your finance manager. It's a very different process. So in that sense, you can actually spend a little bit of more money to acquire that customer. And in this case, for example, we're just taking 1/3 of your annual profits is about 2,400 euros, meaning that now to target these people, and LinkedIn is amazing to target finance managers and HR managers because they know that that's the job roles. Now that opens up the perspective to say, hey, if you want to go after this target segment, actually we can do this because we have the justified cost that we can put next to it. And LinkedIn is actually a great channel to acquire these type of leads. So in that sense, that opened up because of the metrics you have across these three things, it opens up and closes up channels. So depending on how your metrics look like and which market segments, you're going to choose and pick your channels. So I hope this MPMC model kind of helps you really understand like, okay, how do I pick channels? Which channels do I need to go first? Before deep diving into, because I don't see Pinterest, for example, advertising on LinkedIn because they're going for masses. That's not a channel that they would work in. So probably their channel is going to be SEO and maybe SEA in down in the future. But if I would be the growth manager, I would not even advise going for LinkedIn. So that is really the I think the philosophy of thinking that you need to think about. Like if LinkedIn ads make sense for me, think about these four things and really try to calculate. Okay, does that make sense for me? Hope that is clear, and see you in the next course.